Hi, how the heck are you? I cry at movies all the time. I'm an emotional person, and when I see something in a film or a TV show that plucks at my heartstrings, I just have a hard time holding it in. As a man in society, there's still some social stigma attached to crying anytime I do it for any reason. Masculinity is seen as stoicism, and sometimes if you can't hold yourself together, people see that as weakness or as inherently unmasculine. I don't really care about being perceived as feminine for any reason, so when I shed a tear for seeing an especially cute cat video or the scene of Game of Thrones where Brienne is knighted, I don't feel any less secure in my masculinity. All that to say that I am not ashamed to admit to you that I am a quick and unabashed crier. And there is nothing in the world that makes me cry more often or more intensely than professional wrestling. When I was young, I existed outside of the world of wrestling. I grew up in a small town and I was a boy that was friends with other little boys, so I did hear about it, and occasionally I'd even play a video game about it at one of their houses. But I was raised in a household where impressionable young children were not allowed to watch violent media, and in the late 90s and early 2000s, the WWF and WCW were sometimes bloody and always featured storylines of oiled up men and scantily clad women punching each other. So that was a hard pass from my parents. So color me completely surprised when I turned 25 and out of nowhere became the biggest wrestling fan in the universe. That year I was working at a restaurant with a bunch of my best friends, and for some reason they had all started watching the current WWE product at that time. And over that time working with my friends that year, they invited me to view pay-per-views with them several times, but my answer was always the same. I would just make fun of wrestling with all the opinions instilled about it in me as a child. It just seems stupid, and it seems like only stupid people enjoy it. I would say extremely judgmentally. And I should have known better because these were friends whose tastes I trusted, and they were just inviting me to participate in an activity that they already enjoyed. But I was young, and when I was 25, I was a much more cynical person than I am today, so I would turn them down over and over again and make fun of their love of the medium. And I'm not proud of that. But I'm lucky to have friends as persistent as they were, because eventually I agreed to go to one of the pay-per-views with the caveat that I would go only to make fun of what they were watching. So they accepted my offer, and I found myself thrust into a very foreign world of people cheering at things I didn't understand, and chants and speeches I was apparently supposed to be doing in unison with all my friends that I had never heard of. But despite my lack of comfort and not really understanding how to watch, I did realize that I was kind of right about wrestling. I thought wrestling was stupid because the characters are broad and sometimes border on parody, and I believed so strongly that the campiness and comedy present in its presentation were unintentional and not at all self-aware. And because of that, I thought I was too good for wrestling. But then, the moment that really busted open my resistant shell happened when a Jersey Shore looking guy and his gigantic friend walked down to the ring. These men were Enzo Amore and Big Cass, and I didn't know anything about them. But lucky for me, my friends and everyone in that arena at that pay-per-view were about to tell me everything I needed to know about the both of them.
My name is Enzo Amore, and I am a certified G and a bona fide stunt, and you can't teach that.
My friends said all of it, word for word, and I wanted to make fun of it, and I was so confused, because without context, what I had just seen was patently insane. But they were smiling and laughing and looking to me for my reaction, so I just laughed and I said, "What was that?" These grown men came out looking like cartoon characters and said a catchphrase, and everyone loved it. I didn't understand the why of what I had just seen, but it was tough to argue with the results. This unified recitation of their catchphrase connected them with the audience in the arena and the audience at home. My friend offered me an Enzo Amore shirt to throw over what I had worn to the pay-per-view, and I put it on, and I felt more receptive to what the performers were putting out. This was my acceptance of promos, or the speaking portion of the performance of wrestling. And Enzo was a good example of getting over with the crowd, aka making them audibly support you when you're on screen. Enzo and Cass had gotten over primarily based on their promo and character work. They were fine in the ring when they were wrestling, but the main attraction of them was when they were together on screen and Enzo had a mic in his hand. From there, my understanding continued to grow, and more, as wrestlers came out throughout the night, I started to understand more of the character that they were trying to put out. This was easy for me to latch onto because my earlier opinion that the wrestlers seemed like broad caricatures had actually proven to be true. I just hadn't realized that their portrayals were actually a selling point rather than something to be ridiculed. The wrestlers were self-aware and they were just acting, and as a fan of TV, film, and especially comedy, I could connect with them now. However, I was still holding on to the opinion that these characters getting into a ring and pretending to punch each other didn't impress me. Knowing that the outcomes were scripted was still a road too far in my suspension of disbelief. But then, I was struck by a revelation when I was introduced to my favorite wrestler of all time, Sami Zayn. Once I saw Sami Zayn wrestle, I understood the craft of the physical aspects of performance in the ring. This wiry Canadian man wasn't the biggest or the strongest or even presented in a way that made me believe he was a threat to other wrestlers. But in the ring, I saw him as a lovable underdog, fighting as hard as he could to find the upper hand against these opponents that were much larger or more acrobatic than him, and it made me root for him. I knew the matches were predetermined, but once I saw someone with such undeniable heart perform, I finally understood that the scripted nature of matches allowed for the physical storytelling that I was seeing. Everything fell into place for me in that moment, and I finally realized for the first time in my life why people loved professional wrestling. And since then, I've become an absolute super fan. I know the names and moves, I know the performer's backstory, I understand references to years past, and I watch nearly every pay-per-view put on by the two largest United States-based promotions, WWE and AEW. Why then do I think that wrestling is any better than any other film or television, and why does it make me cry so much? Well, the first reason is us. Any actor will tell you that the craft of connecting with a live audience on stage during a play or musical is completely different from connecting with a crowd in theaters or at home through the lens of a camera. Wrestling is wholly unique in the fact that performers are tasked with doing both at the same time. When you watch wrestling from the comfort of your own home, there are commentators feeding a near constant stream of information and reactions to you, the viewer. But when you attend one of these same events in person, in a similar fashion to any sporting event, the commentary isn't broadcast to the arena. This means that the performers have to make every second of mic time that they get in that arena count, because that feedback from the audience is the most important part of their job. There's absolutely nothing worse in the world than performing in front of a huge crowd and getting no response. And in wrestling, that happens kind of often. I'm not usually one to scream and yell at an event that I'm in attendance for, or at least I wasn't until I was 25 and I started going to local independent wrestling shows in my city, and I realized that those performers deserved feedback for the performance they were giving. This means now when I attend a wrestling event, I boo and jeer at the heel performers, the villains, and I cheer and scream in support of the face performers, the heroes. Wrestling has a lot of terms that weren't originally designed for the audience to know or understand, and the most important term in keeping that veil of secrecy is kayfabe. Essentially, kayfabe is the term used to describe the upholding of the fiction of wrestling outside of the ring. It used to be absolutely paramount that audiences never found out wrestling matches weren't real contests of strength. When they began, they were performed in absolute earnestness at circuses between strongmen, and promoters wanted people to pay to see them compete, so they upheld the illusion by lying to crowds about the nature of the performances. Nowadays, kayfabe has loosened a lot, because as a public we know that all wrestling outcomes are predetermined, but the performers still sometimes uphold a certain level of kayfabe when interacting outside of the ring. Where one performer might go on a serious interview podcast about the craft of professional wrestling and speak earnestly outside of character about their experiences, some more dedicated character performers will go the opposite direction. This means sometimes seeing storylines from inside the ring continued in other forms of media and into the performers' real lives. In no other performance medium is it normal to see two performers walking a red carpet for a film one of them acted in and having them start attacking each other in front of all of the very real celebrities and media present for the film's premiere. But in wrestling, some of these characters transcend the weekly shows that they appear on And if you're going to get an autograph for your child from their favorite bad guy, it might end in you not getting an autograph and your child crying. It's a very odd form of entertainment, and seeing real-life billionaire owner of All Elite Wrestling Tony Khan at the NFL draft wearing a neck brace because he was fictionally attacked on his TV show is something that probably seems foreign to non-wrestling fans who encounter moments of performance like that in a medium with which they are familiar. Sami Zayn, who I mentioned earlier, my favorite, is real-life, longtime best friends with Kevin Owens, another fantastic WWE performer. They're often portrayed as best friends on TV, but every few years they sour on each other for some narrative reason or another. They end up in big matches together, and even though the viewers at home know that they're lifelong best friends, they take that opportunity to beat the snot out of each other. And balancing their real-life relationship with their characters' relationships in these situations is actually sometimes a tremendous boon to the performance. One of the most important things wrestlers do for one another in the ring is make it look like they're hurting one another, but do their absolute best to prevent the other performer from coming into any actual harm. This means that seeing people in the ring that trust each other in real life creates some of the most brutal matches on television. They can hit harder, they can bruise more, because they know what the other person can take, and they don't have to worry about alienating their coworker across the ring from them because that's their best friend. This example of friends portraying a bitter, violent rivalry on TV is another great example of something that makes wrestling so unique. In no other form of entertainment is the line between reality and fiction so blurred. Sure, on a reality show, you'll sometimes see conflict between cast members portrayed as drama on the show, and then hear that it caused some real-life issues between the two. And the same is true in wrestling, but where it differs from reality TV is that in wrestling, the transfer of context can go both ways. A great example of what I'm talking about is how Christian Cage handles himself as a villain in All Elite Wrestling. For decades, Christian Cage has been performing and entertaining audiences across several national wrestling brands. He's an undeniable talent, and for almost all of his career, that's been the case. But it's clear now, at 51 years of age, in the twilight of his performing years, that he is on the best run of his career. This all began with him turning heel, or switching from being a good guy to a bad guy. In the narrative of AEW, he had been acting as a sort of mentor figure for the tag team Jurassic Express, composed of a young Tarzan-looking man named Jungle Boy and his 65-million-year-old friend, Luchasaurus. Wrestling is awesome. So Christian Cage turns on his boy, steals Luchasaurus away, renames him Killswitch, and then makes fun of Jungle Boy Jack Perry's real-life dead father, Luke Perry.
But here's the thing, Jungle Boy. I never wanted to be your father. I never wanted to be your father figure. You have a father, but your father's dead.
In doing this, he gets one of the biggest crowd reactions a heel can get, because not only are most people aware of Jack's dad from his fame as an actor, but also because you can't say that on TV. Eventually, he and Jack Perry finished up their storyline together and moved on to other stuff, but Christian Cage just kept picking fights with wrestlers whose fathers were dead in real life. And at this point, he's gone so far as to name his stable the Patriarchy, where he seeks out wrestlers with dead fathers and claims that he will be their new father figure. This kind of narrative cannot exist in any other form of entertainment because there just aren't versions of character acting that are so intrinsically informed by who you are outside of the character in real life. If you perform as a wrestler on TV, and your significant other also performs on TV, and you break up publicly, you better bet the next time a bad guy has a microphone in the ring with you, you're gonna have to deal with all your real feelings of grief while that bad guy lays into you about that breakup. It's truly crazy how often offhandedly said things on the internet can spiral into complete storylines or new allyships or rivalries with other performers. One of the most important things to know about wrestling is that the fact that the outcomes are predetermined and that you know that does not make the sport fake. Unlike actors in any other form of media, wrestlers are their own stunt people. Alongside mastering the crafts of character work, captivating a live audience, cutting a compelling promo, and maintaining kayfabe, they also have to be in near-peak physical human condition to do what they do. Some wrestlers are just absolute walls of oily muscle, and some wrestlers carry more fat on their bodies, but all wrestlers have to train constantly. The cardio demand of a job that has you sprinting around a wrestling ring and picking up another full-grown adult over and over again is unbelievable. The matches may be choreographed to an extent, but combining the physical demands of performance with the obligation to prevent any real injuries to your opponent is an art form. Sometimes wrestlers will work more stiff, which means they hit harder than others. There are many performers known especially for how stiff they work when they chop each other in the chest. And famously, The Undertaker, who would otherwise read as like a man's man of masculinity, hates taking chops. Why? Because a chop is literally just slapping someone with your open hand on their chest. You can't fake that. The athletes go out on TV each night to perform and leave it all in the ring for the fans. And while they try to prevent one another from breaking their neck or injuring their spines, there are real instances of pain and causing harm to each other that are just considered to be a part of the craft. This is why I hate, somehow still, in 2025, hearing people respond to me saying that I love wrestling with, "You know it's fake, right?" Everyone, everywhere, for the entire 34 years that I've been alive, has known that wrestling is scripted. That's not new or revelatory information. It's also not accurate because any fan will tell you that wrestling is real and the outcomes are scripted. It's been beaten to death at this point, but I'll add one more beating to the pile. Film and TV are scripted, but you wouldn't respond to someone saying they love Breaking Bad by saying, "You know it's fake, right?" Because everyone knows that, and it doesn't matter. Let's take a moment to step back for a second and talk about something that I've already been referencing throughout the video: the characters that wrestlers are portraying. I think when people who aren't fans think about characters in wrestling, they've probably only been exposed to a few of the really big ones over the course of the history of the sport. Most people probably know about Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker, Ric Flair, or Sting, at least in passing. Some wrestlers have just become so culturally ubiquitous that it's impossible to not know about them even as a layperson. And in that era of those wrestlers, it was the 90s, which means public perception of wrestling is kind of stuck in the 90s with those characters and with tropes of that time. While wrestling was at one point about men walking into the ring, steroids coursing through their bodies, just flexing on each other, trying to prove they were the most toxically masculine guy in the ring that night, that's actually changed quite a lot over the last 30 years. In this, the year 2025, we are absolutely spoiled silly by the number of available wrestling programs on a weekly basis. This means the idea of characters has expanded tremendously, especially on the independent scene. Where there were a few weird supernatural characters in the 90s or some comedy characters that lasted for just a little bit of time, those kind of wrestlers can make huge careers for themselves now, and they don't have to be named The Undertaker. For performers to connect with their audiences, they have to have a well-defined enough character, as well as perform that character broadly enough that you read it the same way whether you're standing next to the ring or watching them on a phone halfway across the world. Most wrestlers begin by building their in-ring persona around real-life attributes they possess, and then layering on more and more character until they reach sort of a parody of themselves. And there are some very creative people in wrestling today. I'm going to talk about a few of my personal favorites, just to show how far you can go in your wrestling career today, with some characters that are probably going to be completely baffling to people who are not already fans of them. Toni Storm was a well-liked WWE wrestler who had made a name for herself in the all-women's Japanese wrestling promotion Stardom, and upon reaching the main shows that WWE presents, she found herself forced into some less than desirable story that she felt was degrading to her personally, as well as cheapening to her stock professionally. She departed WWE abruptly after taking a pie to the face, and when she showed up in upstart rival promotion AEW, she presented herself in the way that had worked for her in the past in Stardom, as an Australian rocker girl. However, a little ways into her time with AEW in 2023, she made a dramatic shift in character and began to present herself as a golden age Hollywood starlet. She began appearing in vignettes aired throughout the week on AEW programming in black and white, presented in interview format, where she essentially laid out her manifesto as this completely unhinged parody of old Hollywood. Eventually, she started wrestling as this character, and her in-ring entrance was also shifted to appear in black and white. The crowd loved this version of Toni Storm. and she had a very memorable reign as the AEW Women's World Champion with her then new lackey Mariah May. In an All About Eve inspired twist to the story, Mariah May turned on everyone's favorite Hollywood star, and their fight over the AEW Women's Championship is ongoing to this day. It's considered by many wrestling contemporaries to be the greatest long-term women's story ever told in all of wrestling. Orange Cassidy is a lethargic performer who hates trying. He presents as too cool for wrestling, and he's known for keeping his hands in his pockets while he wrestles in-ring. Cassidy is a performer that arrived in AEW already fully formed as a comedy act from wrestling on the independent circuit in the US for several years. He was an established character, and due to AEW being a promotion taking in a lot of indie fans, their viewers already knew him from his previous work. Many veteran performers of the 80s and 90s were extremely cynical and sometimes hostile to Cassidy's rise as a credible threat to championship-level performers. But Cassidy was able to keep the core comedic tenets of his character as he expanded it throughout his time in AEW. This evolution led to a chant of "he's gonna try" in advance of a pay-per-view where he claimed he would try for the first time in his career. And since that match, he's put on incredibly varied performances with incredible talents. And even though he's lazy, he eventually even came up with a catchphrase.
Because I am freshly squeezed Orange Cassidy, and I do not have a catchphrase.
All the while still presenting himself as too cool for the whole thing and doing his classic hands in his pockets bit. Just because he's the only one carrying his belt around in a JanSport when he's champion does not mean he doesn't deserve to be champion. Lastly, it would be a shame to not take a moment to remember who is probably the most creative character wrestler ever to have lived. Bray Wyatt was initially a WWE wrestler that portrayed a sort of backwoods cult leader character, and he was known for his ability to deliver promos that compelled everyone in an audience to near silence. His grasp of his Southern preacher-style cadence of delivery made him unique in a way that most wrestlers aren't, and his creative mind for out-there fantastical characters was unparalleled. Known for his tremendous heart and loving nature, he was a staple of the wrestling landscape for nearly the entirety of his time performing. Unfortunately, the world lost Bray Wyatt in 2023 very suddenly and unexpectedly at the extremely tragic age of 36, but not before his most interesting contribution to wrestling was established. The Fiend was a two-sided character presentation that had Wyatt switching between two opposite personas. The character was presented starting with vignettes during WWE programming where Wyatt would appear in the Firefly Funhouse, which was a Blue's Clues sort of kids show set with like an off-putting dark twist. He hosted the show with a cheery demeanor and smile, but often the segments would end with one of the scary puppets that he hosted the show alongside having some sort of harm befall them in an off-putting and scary way, or having Wyatt himself recite his alter ego's catchphrase, "Let me in." So when The Fiend finally appeared after months of build, wearing a Slipknot-like terrifying clown mask, walking to the ring with a lantern made to look like Bray Wyatt's old cult character's severed head, it was clear that the character was an immediate all-time fan favorite. The WWE historically had trouble presenting Bray's characters in their booking decisions, so despite his ability to win several world titles as this character, fans had a hard time with the choices made surrounding his reigns as champion. Regardless, his legacy lives on through his brother, wrestler Bo Dallas, who currently performs in the WWE as a Bray Wyatt-created character, Uncle Howdy, alongside his stable of weird freaks, the Wyatt Six. So it's hopefully clear at this point that characters in wrestling can succeed despite being as traditional or as original as the performer wants them to be. So given all those reasons as to why wrestling is so unique a medium of entertainment, why does it make me cry so much more than all those other forms of media? Wrestling is storytelling, just like any other scripted TV show or film, but the characters are more real to the audience because they exist within so much truth of who the performers are. If you've followed a wrestler for years and you see them in interviews saying that they're finally ready to take on that big belt and hold the championship and be on top of the mountain, it's impossible to not root for them to be able to accomplish that. Parasocial connections are so common in our daily lives, from content creators to celebrities that we follow, because so much of their personality can be reflected to us through social media or interviews. We can literally see someone like Liv Morgan, who was originally just a forgettable lackey in a stable in WWE, rise to becoming the WWE Women's Champion and putting on matches that are more memorable every single time she gets in the ring week to week. When someone accomplishes something like that in wrestling, it's impossible for me and not cry about it because we've seen the entire process the whole way through. We see them strive and push and climb and claw their way to the top until they finally become the champion, and that's amazing to watch. It's truly the nature of it being both real and scripted, and the fact that we see the transparency in who makes these decisions, so we know that Tony Khan or Triple H decided to make them champion and then carry the company alongside them. It's the beauty of seeing an athlete that you love winning combined with the beauty of seeing a character that you've loved for years fight and fight until they finally beat that one enemy they need to win. Fans of wrestling just invest more emotion in their fandom of their favorite wrestlers than a lot of people would with their favorite athletes or other characters in media. And that investment means when your favorite finally wins the big one, there are going to be a lot of tears shed in that arena from other fans whose favorite also just won that top prize. Plus, I just cry a lot. What do you want from me? Look at you. You made it to the end of the video. Consider yourself the new, reigning, defending, heavyweight world champion of my heart. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below about your favorite wrestler or the first time you remember being exposed to the sport of wrestling. Thanks for watching. See you next time.